La parole, Monsieur Greffier, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le sénateur Routier. Monsieur le sénateur Osef.
Présent.
Monsieur le sénateur McLean. Monsieur le sénateur Gorse.
Présent.
Monsieur le sénateur Farnham. Monsieur le sénateur Balash. Monsieur le sénateur Green. Madame le sénateur Ferguson. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Madame le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Wall.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Sever. Monsieur le connétable de Griville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Madame le député Martin. Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député de Griville.
Présente.
Madame le député Hilton. Monsieur le député Lefondre. Madame le député de la Trinité.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Louis de Saint-Sever.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Tadier. Monsieur le député Noel. Madame le député de Saint-Jean. Monsieur le député Higgins. Monsieur le député Masson. Madame le député Pennell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Bryans.
Présent.
Madame le député de Saint-Pierre. Monsieur le député Rondel. Monsieur le député Mezek. Monsieur le député Louis de Saint-Hélier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député de Saint-Wall.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Labby. Monsieur le député Wickenden.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Bree.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Norton.
Présent.
Monsieur le député MacDonald.
Présent.
Monsieur le député de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Truscott.
Présent.
Monsieur le député McClinton.
Monsieur Doyle.
Prions Dieu, notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et que nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toutes les délibérations, et accompagnées de ta bénédiction, réussissent au bien et soulagement du peuple qu'il t'a plu de commettre à leur soin. Quand nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite en la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le sénateur Routier.
Présent.
Monsieur le sénateur McLean.
C'est faux.
Monsieur le sénateur Farnham.
C'est faux.
Monsieur le sénateur Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le sénateur Green.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Sever.
C'est faux.
Madame le député Martin.
Malade.
Je jurais que Madame la députée Martin est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister au test sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame la députée Hilton.
So I would ask that the deputy be marked defo excusé for the same reasons as yesterday.
Members agree. Therefore, excusez.
Monsieur le Député Lafondre.
Sir, Deputy Founder has asked that members make him defo excusé as a member of his family has been hospitalised.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Deputy Founder has asked if he be marked defo excusé as a member of his family have been hospitalised.
Members agree. Therefore, excusez.
Monsieur le Député Tardieu. Monsieur le Député Higgins.
Présent.
Monsieur le Député Masson.
Présent.
Madame la Députée de Saint-Pierre.
Présente.
Monsieur le Député Rontel.
Therefore,
Monsieur le Député Mezek. Madame la Députée Dublé.
So I wonder if for family reasons Deputy Dublé could be defo excusé as per yesterday. Thank you.
therefore, excusez.
Monsieur le Député Labby.
Présent.
Les états sont nombreux, Monsieur le Président.
Les États sont constitués. Good morning to all. I hope I will be forgiven for saying just a few things about yesterday's debate and vote. I couldn't say them earlier because I didn't want to be seen as trying to influence the outcome in any way at all, but it seems odd to come back in today as though nothing occurred yesterday at all. The first thing I wanted to say is that it is a pleasure and a privilege to be here, sitting in this really quite uncomfortable chair. It is a privilege because the bailiff's job in this chamber is to serve the Assembly. Not any one of you personally, but all of you collectively as the representative, democratically elected voice of our island. Neither I nor the Deputy Bailiff nor my immediate predecessors have ever had any doubt about that. The second thing follows on from the first. The debate about the role of the bailiff has gone on now for some 5 or 6 years. Now, of course, the issue has arisen previously from time to time, but the debate has recently been more intense. It is your right to have it that way. I want to be absolutely clear about that. And I make absolutely no criticism at all for it. Indeed, I thank you for your restrained speeches yesterday in the sense that they were largely about principle and practice and not about personalities. But I can also tell you from here that the impending debate has to some extent inhibited me from doing the whole job of bailiff. Because the bailiff serves the Assembly as its president, his or her ability to be useful to it depends to some extent on what members will allow him or want him to do. Now, some members spoke yesterday about how in other jurisdictions the Speaker is more proactive in promoting the Parliament. I want to say publicly and to you all that I am completely comfortable about doing that. Not promoting policies or individual politicians, but promoting democracy. It's not in any way incompatible, in my view, with being the island's Chief Justice, because the Royal Court, with this Assembly, is a guardian of the rule of law, of which one strand is the supremacy of the legislature. So I hope members will be ready to accept that offer, because in me and in the Deputy Bailiff you have willing servants if you want them. Finally, perhaps I can add this. Many jurisdictions have different constitutional structures. They are the product of history, not tradition, but history. And when we talk about ours, whether it's in the island or abroad, and we, and when I say we, I mean states members, I mean the media, and I mean islanders generally, can either talk it up or can talk it down. We can be proud that our history takes us to where we are, or we can be apologists for it. To my mind, it's not a question of being out of step with other countries, but rather as a small jurisdiction with limited financial and human resources, achieving the same objectives, including having a completely independent Speaker in this Assembly in a slightly different manner. I am immensely proud of this island of ours, and it is an unbelievable honour to be her bailiff and to preside in this Assembly.
Now, Sir, one, can I welcome you back
And 2, can I raise the defo on Deputy Rondell? Thank you.
Proposed defo be raised on Deputy Rondell. The defo is raised. Now, Senator Joseph, I understand you have a statement to make about television licences.
So could we raise the defo, please, on Senator Farnham as well, please?
Proposed defo be raised on Senator Farnham. Defo is raised.
Yes, sir, thank you. And I apologise, due to illness in the London office, the statement wasn't available to the GREF yesterday for delivery yesterday morning. So I thank you for your opportunity of making it now. So I'm making this statement in response to Deputy Tadier's proposition of P117 2016 regarding age-related concessions to television licence fees for Jersey residents. I'm making this statement in order for members to question what is an important matter of public importance. And it follows Deputy Mezek's original written question of the October 2015. And I wanted to provide members with the update on what the government has been doing in this area, and in particular the linked issue of the BBC Charter renewal more generally. As members will know, the Charter forms the constitutional basis for the BBC, sitting alongside the framework agreement that adds a detail of levels of a policy detail. Collectively, these two documents set out the public purposes for the BBC. They guarantee its independence and they cover its various duties and funding. Both apply to Jersey and both expire at the end of the year. To ensure that Jersey's relationship with the BBC remains clearly defined from January, therefore, the States of Jersey officials have, since 2015, been in regular dialogue and discussion with the BBC and its interlocutor department, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, known as DCMS. These discussions have covered various subjects within the broader context of the Charter renewal. However, I can confirm that officials were tasked with specifically ensuring that the BBC continues to treat the island fairly with regard to funding for TV licence concessions, and that also Jersey receives a high level of service provision from the BBC in future in terms of radio, television and other services, such as indeed live coverage, albeit on radio, sir, of this Assembly's deliberations. In early discussions, it was established that the agreement between the UK and the BBC regarding age-related concessions to the TV licence only applied to people over the age of 75 in the UK and not the Crown dependencies. As members will understand, this is partly due to the fact that the social security systems of the jurisdictions are separate and distinct. Until a formal agreement has been finalised with the BBC, I cannot confirm the full outcome of these discussions. However, it is worth noting that officers from the small digital policy team and the London office have developed a very strong working relationship with their counterparts at both the BBC and DCMS over the course of the past year. And I can say that both parties have been receptive to our requests. I am also happy to advise that where appropriate, these discussions have been conducted on a Pan-Island basis with representatives of Guernsey and the Isle of Man to ensure an equitable approach across our Crown dependencies. In recent months, meetings between States of Jersey officials and the DCMS and BBC took place on the 16th of December 2015, 17th of December 2015 with DCMS, 27th of April 2016 with DCMS, 19th of May 2016 BBC, 16th of August with BBC and DCMS, and on the 4th of November 2016 with DCMS. So I hope that this goes to some extent to answering the question by Deputy Tadier. Perhaps it was disappointing that the Deputy did not seek to even ask or email me directly about the progress that was being made and instead simply lodged a proposition, which is, of course, he's right. I look forward to providing further information once an agreement between the States of Jersey and the BBC has been finalised. And this will be, I hope, before the end of the year. In the meantime, and subject to the caveat that I've already mentioned, I thought that this statement was required because I could then ask questions that members may have on this important issue of public policy. Thank you, sir.
Are there any questions for the Assistant Chief Minister? Senator Ferguson.
Yes, sir. Given that members of the population in Jersey have to pay the full £145 for annual fee for having a television set rather than actually subscribing to the BBC, why do the BBC not consider that it would be fair to provide the free licences for the over 75s? You know, we're paying the full whack. Why shouldn't we get the benefits as well as the payment?
So the senator is right in the sense that the background to this is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, of which I offer no criticism or sort of approbation or whatever, basically put to the United Kingdom, for better or for worse, had free TV licences universally applied over 75s, and that was paid for out of taxpayers' money. Some people describe it as a sleight of hand to move that cost. And it is not a casual cost, sir. It represents approximately 20% of the budget of the BBC. Now, to put that 20% cost on the BBC without any other change to the way the BBC raises its licence fee, raises its income, would have massive issues to the BBC. And I think members will understand that the BBC has a commitment to Jersey with its own radio broadcast. Maybe members don't like what it says sometimes, but we have an open and free and fair democracy, and there is effectively a dedication to the British Broadcasting Corporation in Jersey, of which we are fortunate. And we didn't want the unintended effect of saying pay for over 75 licences and effectively then lose the effectively benefit that we have for the BBC. That's the reason.
Thanks, sir. I make no apology for bringing a proposition, because after my 8 or so years in the States, I know that that's what you need to do sometimes to get results. And I don't think we'd be in a position to have this statement today were it not for that. And I look forward to the fuller statement being brought at the end of the year. My question is, I note from the text that it's couched in very cautious language. So there is a talk about getting a fair deal for the island and an equitable approach across the Crown dependencies. But of course, fair is subjective. Now, can the Assistant Minister give us an assurance that when talks are happening, there is somebody there saying, we expect and want the BBC to give free TV licences to over 75s in Jersey to ensure a level playing field, and we will accept nothing less than that? Has that position been put forward to the DCMS and to the BBC on behalf of Islanders?
Sir, you spoke well, if I may say, with your remarks, first of all, to the Assembly about how matters evolve. And we have evolved into a system of ministerial government in this Assembly. And so, I'm sorry, sir, but I have to say to Deputy Tadier, his proposition is, frankly, unnecessary, in my view, and unhelpful. Because does he not understand, sir, that this is a delicate negotiation, and you can't just go in with hobnail boots and say to the BBC, pay over 75 licences? Many people would question as to whether or not it is sustainable in the longer term for age-related benefit, universal benefit licences to be affordable. This problem has been passed a taxpayer-funded benefit in the UK, as the problem has been shifted to the BBC, and that is now having to be dealt with to the BBC. Of course, we are going to want to have equality for islanders and people who pay the £146. But we have to be realistic. We are living in a world where there is an increasing problem, advantage, fantastic thing about people living older. And is it possible in 10, 20, 30 years' time to see that there will be free TV licences, if the licence fee continues as it is, for everybody? Do you want to pay millionaires to have a licence fee together with people on low incomes? Are there people on other low incomes that actually would benefit but I think the Social Security income support system should be actually paying for these, but that's what you do. Is it sustainable? His proposition, if he would just come and ask, he would get the answer, but he doesn't. He wants to put a proposition in to say, look at me, aren't I great, I'm solving the problem. It's not fair.
So if the proposition is necessary, then it's on the table. If it's no longer necessary, it can be withdrawn. The Minister is conflating two issues. When he talks about the long-term sustainability of the TV licence and giving free TV licences non-means tested, that's the BBC's choice. That's the UK government's choice. It has nothing to do with the Social Security Minister over here. And all we're saying is that if the BBC, and they are to introduce free TV licences for all over 75s in the UK, then why shouldn't that apply to British citizens and licence fee payers across the British Isles who need to pay for a licence to watch television otherwise? That there must be a level playing field. And would the Minister seek not to conflate the issues and to be very clear in making that representation to the relevant bodies in the UK?
So let me correct the Deputy. He didn't need this proposition to get the government of Jersey and the London office to work. We've been working, as this answer is clear, right from the start to preserve the rights of the output that the BBC, the valued output. We want a plural media. We don't only want the JP. We don't only want the BBC. We want ITV, and we want basically good quality, high quality broadcasts for our own island democracy, which covers the deliberations and the discussions here. And basically,
Minister, you're being asked whether you would accept the comments which the Deputy's just made.
no, I don't accept them. I think they're jolly unhelpful, and if he would just actually ask rather than actually put forward propositions. The problem with the Deputy's policy, sir, is they run out of other people's money.
Not in order. Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. Would the Assistant Minister inform the Assembly what the situation is in the Isle of Man and indeed the other Crown dependencies?
It's a very good question, sir. The situation with the Isle of Man is somewhat different. My understanding is that government, immediately after their election, has made a decision to fund licence fees from general revenues. I would draw the attention to the Deputy of the different arrangement that the BBC has. There is no BBC station. When the BBC local radio was set up, as I think Deputy Lewis will know, we have the BBC here, whereas the Isle of Man set up Manx Broadcasting Corporation, which again I make no observation, but I note that there is a significant cost to the taxpayer of the Isle of Man of that. I don't quite understand exactly what the recent decision is with the Isle of Man is, but certainly we're working hand in glove with Guernsey, and of course we always take a Crown dependency approach.
Deputy St John.
Thank you, sir. Could the Assistant Minister advise why it's taken a proposition to be lodged for him to make a statement to the Assembly informing us of what's going on?
I thought that if ministers were to be making statements on everything that they're doing, then this Assembly would be sitting every day. I thought that there is a comment, I think, made by the UK Prime Minister and others about Brexit, that you don't want to give a running commentary. And effectively, when you are in delicate, difficult, challenging negotiations, which means that there is a real problem to be solved, then sometimes you actually don't want to actually say that you're engaged in those discussions. Policy under development, and that's the reason why. The proposition, I would have told off the record to members of this Assembly, who I trust, everybody in this Assembly I trust, I would have said what the situation was, but it is not something that I can announce because it has not been finally agreed. However, I'm giving the strongest message that I can that proactive work, positive work, respectful work has been done, and I hope to get a good solution for our island community.
Sir, supplementary, sorry. If that's the case then, Assistant Minister, with regards to what you've just stated, why couldn't the Assistant Minister wait for the actual debate on the proposition rather than making the statement?
Because it's been put into the public domain, sir, because there's been comments made on the media. The media now runs, of course, they will run stories about the fact that we're not doing something. Deputy Tadier puts a proposition in. It gets a response, as it must, and it's his right, and he can do what he likes. I don't say that, but I just say that effectively this is, I hope I'm giving the very clear, important information to members. This has been a delicate and sensitive negotiation. If one would have imposed the cost of licence fees without a discussion about the Charter, there could have been an unintended consequence of, for example, the BBC considering that its investment in Jersey and its radio output and the almost disproportionate, perhaps, benefit that we get from the BBC output in Jersey with their commitment with the radio station and now CI Broadcasting and their nightly use. And one would not want to have had an unintended effect. One needs to work with people, and I know the deputies, that's very much in her style, work with people, not against them.
Deputy Labby.
Sir, I do not believe that the Channel Islands get the full range of BBC services, despite locals paying the full licence fee. Is that the Assistant Minister's understanding also?
I think the deputy speaking there, certainly the full range of services is access on the new digital output. That, I'm afraid, is an issue of our proximity to France, whereby everywhere else in the United Kingdom had a switchover where you could have analog and digital, and we had to do it overnight because we have one of these issues. We're near France. They have frequency services. We have to actually have our own bandwidth, which means that we don't get those services. But those services are available online, and because we have now a fibred community, we can actually get those services delivered faster and better than anywhere else in the UK when everybody gets fibre, so we can actually deliver that signal in a different way in future. So they can get them, just not through the aerial.
Any questions? Deputy
The minister makes, the assistant minister, makes great play of the fact that we have a radio service in Jersey, which he thinks is quality. We won't go too much into that. But is it not the case that actually the licence fee doesn't pay for, the licence fee isn't paid for the benefit of listening to radio, it's for TV production, and of course I appreciate that monies get spread around. But you don't have to pay a TV licence to listen to the radio in Jersey. You do have to pay a TV licence to watch television, whether that's live or streaming. Is that not the case?
Does Deputy Taddier not understand, sir, that effectively the licence fee is effectively the funding that the BBC gets to run its broadcasts, TV, online, radio. We in Jersey have our own BBC, and I'm delighted, as I've spoken to Senator Balash and the External Relations Minister, you can now look on the I thingy, and you can actually now press the button that we don't look like a regional radio station, we actually look like a proper bit of the United Kingdom, like Scotland or elsewhere. We are privileged, I think, to have the BBC. I think there's a clue in the title, the British Broadcasting Corporation. We're British Jersey, and of course they provide a whole range of services. The licence fee will evolve. I don't think the licence fee will be the licence fee in future. It will have to change. A universal single payment for TV and everything else, together with all the other challenges with competitive media, is not something. And will the BBC in the longer term be able to afford over 75 free TV licences, as politicians love to promise? Would love to promise things, sir, but you run out of other people's money.
And sir, does the Assistant Minister agree with a constituent who has emailed me and says that if the states, our states, decide the BBC has to fund the service and change the law accordingly, as in the UK, the BBC have the following options. One, to withdraw completely from the Channel Islands, which means that everybody would receive the service on satellite for free. And they might try and restrict satellite bands to exclude the Channel Islands, but if Guernsey still get it, that would be impossible. Two, to go along with it, so the UK would basically extend the free TV licences to Jersey. Or three, they would have to introduce some kind of encrypted free-sat service. And does he agree with my constituent that actually two is the most likely scenario, that they would simply, because it is the BBC and not the UKC, that if we are British citizens and we should paying the licence fee, it should be extended to Jersey. Are those three options what the Assistant Minister thinks are on the table at the moment?
You have 1 minute, Minister.
I have no comment to make about from the comments I made earlier about the fact that I will be making an announcement in the proper way after discussions with them the BBC has made, and that will be defending the interests of Jersey, but also celebrating the output of the BBC. And I hope members have been informed about these issues in a way that perhaps I would have hoped that they would have been able to do so in a month's time after the negotiation is finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask the Minister for Digital whether iThingy is a technical term?
I do apologise, sir. You're quite right. iPlayer, I think, is what it is called. I do apologise, sir. iPlayer. So obviously, you are more technically minded than I am, sir.
Probably not. Very well. The chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has a statement to make.
Thank you, sir. The Public Accounts Committee has reviewed the use of public money for travel and accommodation expenditure incurred by senior officers of the States of Jersey. The spending of public money should require the highest levels of probity, hence the need for stringent codes of conduct and financial directions. There was justifiable public concern when it appeared that expenditure for some international trips may not have been procured with regard to the use of public funds, may not have been procured with due regard for use of public funds. Members will know that the Chief Minister's Department conducted its own review, which concluded that there was no widespread misuse of procedures, but that improvements could be made. The PAC agrees that there has not been widespread misuse. However, it concludes that the Chief Minister's Department investigation did not go far enough to identify or highlight the instances of seemingly blatant disregard for the spirit of the Code of Conduct by certain officers. My committee believes that the culture of some departments pushes the boundaries of what the public would consider acceptable conduct. The PAC explored Chief Officer's attitude to the guiding principles of the Code of Conduct. I'll just state it to you. Does the action feel right? Could it be justified to those outside the states? Could I be compromised in my dealings with others as a result of my intended action? Could such purchases be considered extravagant or wasteful of public resource? There is a belief in some departments that they do not need to strictly adhere to the guiding principles of the Code of Conduct, simply because the island receives a good return of investment after officers have attended global networking events. However, the PAC believes that there should be no exception to striving for best value for the public purse. The PAC concludes that expensive business class or fully flexible tickets are rarely justified. It found that a minority of officers made little or no attempt to seek more cost-effective options. It is difficult, if not impossible, to justify the expenditure of certain trips, which unfortunately undermines the very hard work done by other departments to always act in the best interest of the public. The PAC was particularly concerned that in one department a high-cost itinerary was undertaken over 3 consecutive years with little or no exploration of real savings. The PAC also discovered that there were 1.5 million loyalty points centrally accrued on state's business, which officers had little or no knowledge of how to redeem for the benefit of the public. Furthermore, the PAC was shocked to discover that there was no robust procedure in place to redeem personal airline loyalty points accumulated by individual officers. The most worrying consequence of this is that it leaves officers vulnerable to accusations of impropriety. The PAC also noted evidence concerning the use of the centralised booking system. The core reasons for having a central booking system is to reduce officer time and resources, provide value for money, and a clear audit trail. When asked if the system provided these benefits, the majority of officers said it did not, and expressed a low opinion and lack of trust in the system. In fact, one officer went further and blamed the high cost of trips on the system providing limited options. When challenged, he advised that he had sought cost differentials between flight options, between fully flexible flights and business class tickets. The PA considers that comparing fully flexible flights to business class flights is like deciding whether to purchase a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, whereas most chief officers would explore the price differentials of reasonably priced cars. The PAC concluded that although the booking system may have faults, it cannot and should not be blamed for an officer's overriding duty to secure value for money. It is not the PAC's function or intention to name and shame departments. In fact, it wishes to commend the Chief Minister's Department for already taking action to address some of the weaknesses identified. It considers that this represents behaviour that a learning organisation should adopt. However, it does not want the Chief Minister's Department to write a whole new set of financial directions or a raft of prescriptive directives, which could then be interpreted in different ways by different departments. Rather, the PAC urges the Chief Minister's Department to adopt a common-sense, principle-based culture, embodying the best practices of the majority of chief officers. So we hope that the report and the recommendations contained within it will reassure the public that taxpayers' funds which are spent on trips are undertaken with full and careful consideration of best value for money. So I'd like to thank my committee, particularly the lay members that give up their time so willingly, and the officer that helped create the report, and the hard work they did, and commend all the departments that cooperated with our review. Thank you, sir.
Any questions to the Chairman? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. Early on in the statement made by the Chairman, he referred to the culture of some departments, which the committee believes is what contributes to some people acting not within the spirit of the Code of Conduct on this issue. Would the Chairman agree that one of the things that reinforces that culture within these departments is the fact that publicly the Council of Ministers has not gone far enough to criticise them for acting in the way they have done, and led them to believe that they can continue to do this simply because they will always get away with it under this Council of Ministers?
So I am reassured by the Chief Minister that behind the scenes some difficult conversations have been had, and that cultural change is well on the way. We've written a number of other reports that identify cultural issues within the States of Jersey that cover a number of matters, and I'm encouraged that that is changing, but it doesn't change overnight, sir. I hope that reports like this, statements like this, and media attention, which has also been generated by this, helps change that culture over time. Thanks, sir.
Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. The chairman of the PAC says that his panel doesn't want to name and shame. The truth of the matter is the public have no confidence in the government to bring in change on this type of thing. And I think the public have a right to know which departments have been abusing the system. So it would have been a far more effective report had they actually named which departments have been abusing the process. And then the public could see, as time goes forward, as the states could, whether steps have been taken to curtail that type of abuse.
Is there a question?
Does the chairman not agree, sir?
No, sir, that's a matter for the States Employment Board. The purpose of our report is simply to highlight procedural inefficiencies or deficiencies and make recommendations, suggestions how that can be avoided in the future. I hope that the members feel that in the report that we go, we go far enough to explain what those procedures and systems could look like, and I'm assured by the Chief Minister's Department that many of those recommendations are being taken on board. It is not the place for PAC to start acting like the States Employment Board and criticising individual officers, many of whom work extremely hard for the States of Jersey, but just a few have unfortunately not followed the full Code of Conduct in its entirety and some financial directions.
Senator Ferguson.
I note the comment that the departments have made no efforts to deal with the air miles. Has it not occurred to the States Employment Board or the Chief Executive that such behaviour, collecting air miles, does cause a dysfunctional reaction with the staff, because they will always go on with the particular airline if that's giving them air miles, which presumably some of the staff are using. Now, if they're using air miles that they've gained through work for private purposes, is there no system of actually paying the states for the use of those air miles? Have you found any evidence of... sorry, sir. Yes, I should know. Has the PAC not found any evidence of this? Has it asked about it?
Yes, sir, very much so. It's in the report. If you read the section on the accumulation of loyalty points, we've discussed it in some depth and made some recommendations. At the moment, there is no simple, easy way of redeeming the points for the benefit of the public purse and separating personally collected points from points collected through business travel. And that's a deficiency in the current system. Also, we've recommended that there should be a contractual obligation to actually disclose the points you attain and the very fact that you have a loyalty card. At the moment, we were told that data protection prevented the members or the staff from actually being asked for that information. But if it becomes a contractual obligation, which we're recommending, then they will have to disclose that they have a loyalty card, and they'll have to disclose how many points they've accrued, and they can then be separated from their personal gain points, from their business points, and then used for the benefit of the public purse. And I can cite an instance recently whereby education have used points to drastically reduce the cost of their trip to China for educational purposes by using the points. But the system was not in place for them to do that but a few months ago.
I find that strange, sir, because I do understand that a particular member of this assembly collected a considerable number of points during his working career, and in fact he donated them to the Overseas Aid Commission so that they could use them to go on their trips. So why is this not being considered?
So the system allows that to happen right now. The points can be transferred to somebody else's account. Any of us can do that with any points now. The problem we have is that if you actually want to make bookings through the current system using loyalty points for business purposes, that's much more difficult. But actually donating them to a third party is actually easier, and that's a deficiency in the current system, which the Chief Minister's Department say that they are going to find a system to adjust that so that we can use accumulated loyalty points to reduce the cost of travel, because they are actually worth a lot of money. That 1.5 million points is worth about £200,000. So that should be contributed to the cost of business travel. Currently, the system doesn't permit to do that, but you can donate your points to whoever you wish.
So I don't need to ask my question.
Deputy Kevin Lewis.
Sorry, the Chairman's just answered the question, sir.
Deputy St Warren.
Thank you, sir. The Chairman has spoken about receiving assurances, and in his report he commends the Chief Minister's Department for already taking action to address some of the weaknesses identified. But I would like to ask the Chairman whether he can say that PAC have seen a programme that is robust and workable and enforceable, and which addresses all of the weaknesses identified.
No, sir, currently we have not. That's the purpose of the report. There are a number of recommendations in there, and the normal course of events is the department who are most responsible here, which is Chief Minister's Department, will respond to that report and the recommendations contained in it. And we would like to see, and we normally do from all departments, a programme of implementation of the recommendations, or a very good reason as to why they're not going to implement those recommendations. So I wait with great interest from the Chief Minister's Department a full response to that report, and I hope that members will then be even further assured that the Chief Minister's Department has considered them and is decided, I hope, to adopt all, if not most, of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I welcome the statement by the Chairman and the committee's conclusions and the work on it, and also the comments about the principles-based approach. Can I, the statement, and I have lived with this issue right from the start because I was on that Cape Town trip, and I have suggestions have been made about my own comments about that. Will the Chairman say that he will, at some point in his term of office, look again at the cost of travel and actually look at the value for money? Because we have had a culture, does he understand that not as a result of his work, but as a result of the things that were done and the expensive and all the rest of it, that the unintended consequence of good people doing hard work for the states are now frightened of getting their names on the front page of the JEP because they are effectively travelling, and just the fact that they very do travel. And will he send a very clear and unequivocal message out that as we are now building our trade and international relations around the world, that they are going to be needing, and we want our officials and others to travel, but obviously prudently, and that is important to economic growth? Will he give that assurance that there should be no worry for people doing their job properly, just for the avoidance of doubt?
So the PAC and members here have absolutely no problem with the Minister and others, officers, travelling the world, spreading the great story about Jersey. Absolutely no problem with that at all. That does not, however, mean that they cannot follow the rules. Follow the rules absolutely to the letter, and that has not happened in recent times. So when the public then criticise you for it, sir, they consequently lose sight of the benefits that are accrued from making these trips. And that's the concern. The Assistant Minister himself was criticised in the media this week about his own travel. I would like to see the Assistant Minister publish a report on his travel as to what he's achieved during that period. If he has a report, please publish it, because then the members of the public and this Assembly will fully understand his work and what he achieves from spending that money. So reporting back on these matters is important, and following the rules is important. Do both those things, and there's no reason why we shouldn't continue the great work that he and other members of the estates do whilst travelling overseas. That should and must continue, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't follow the rules.
So I'd like to thank the Chairman for his report. I think it is fair and balanced. It praises where praise is due and criticises and challenges where it is due. One of their particular recommendations, which I find interesting, is moving to a principles-based approach. And I wonder if the Chairman could say a little bit more about that, because I think what the result of such a recommendation is that you have a centralised system like we currently do, but you almost need to have a two approach system where you can be more flexible, because there are benefits from people's personal cards that can be delivered to the value of several £1,000s, and there is sometimes that an individual PA or secretary can book something far cheaper and quicker and change it, providing they're working within the principles. But for the majority of travel, you still need the centralised system. I wonder if the Chairman could say a little bit more about how he sees that working in future.
Yes, sir. We've been slightly critical of the centralised booking system, but it wasn't actually fully within our remit. The reason why we've mentioned it is because officers mentioned it to us in public hearings, being very critical of themselves. And I've met with the Chief Minister and his officers since, and there is talk about a two-tier system. We shouldn't be slowing officers down from making arrangements simply because the system is difficult at times to use, and we must be presenting best value. We saw little evidence that the current system provides better value for money, a quicker, more efficient service, or a good audit trail. There is no issue with people making direct bookings with suppliers, providing the accounting system allows you to do it. In other words, there must be a code for every booking that the JD Edwards system we currently use in the Treasury can recognise. When we asked for information about the booking system and transactions that have been made, we had a real problem trying to get information from the Treasury, because it wasn't even coded currently significantly enough. So if you go away from a centralised system without a good IT system for the management of the funds, then you've got a real problem. So we need to fix the Treasury system first, and then it will enable members and officers to make individual bookings and attain better value and still account for the funds. What we can't have is one almighty mess of transactions done on credit cards and charge cards and the like of, without a good Treasury accounting system to manage the funds. That's when it goes horribly wrong. And I don't think centralised booking systems necessarily work as well as some would say, but there are some advantages, but they should be a good audit trail, value for money, and saving money. At the moment, we saw little evidence it was doing any of those things. So a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that that is the case moving forward.
Trusted.
Thank you, sir. Does the chairman think the government reacted quick enough? We have financial challenges. I mean, we've frozen benefits, we've introduced voluntary redundancies, we've got all these things, and yet did they send the message, or do you feel they were slow in sending the message to the workforce to say, well, actually, everyone should be travelling economy class rather than business class, and there really should have been a tightening right at the beginning while effectively austerity was taking place.
So I must commend most officers for taking exactly that line already. The majority do. There was a small instance of a number of departments that do travel significantly that were not abiding by the guiding principles of attaining best value for the public purse and putting the public first. They were living in a little bubble that wasn't necessarily the same bubble that everybody else was in. And that has been highlighted, rightly so, and that has now changed. And I think the Chief Minister did react quite quickly. The Chief Executive, for example, immediately said that any travel over a certain value had to be signed off by him, not by the accounting officer who was actually taking on the expense, which was wrong. They had subordinates signing off their travel expenses. That has changed. I don't think that model is sustainable, but it changed straight away. So they did react, and I think officers were concerned about public perception more so than ever before. The culture of understanding the impact of freedom of information applications has not quite got through to some officers. They are living in a goldfish bowl more so than ever before. Therefore, they must be aware of the implications of freedom of information applications, and that does drive cultural change. There are some unintended consequences from that, which is what the Assistant Minister mentioned. But in the UK, they've been living with this for a long time. It's new to Jersey, and we need to adjust our culture so that we do react quickly to those types of attentions and hopefully minimise them in the future.
Constable, I'm afraid we've left with 4 seconds, so you're too late. That brings question time to an end on those 2 statements.
Excuse me, sir. I wonder if we can remove the defo on the Connie Tolberson Saviour.
I was wondering whether someone was going to suggest that.
And Senator McLean, please, sir.
It's proposed the defo be raised on the Connie Tolberson Saviour and Senator McLean. Agreed. Defo is raised. We now come to P92, 0 hours contracts, the proposition of Deputy Mezek, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion A, that exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts should be prohibited, and B, to request the Minister for Social Security in consultation with the Employment Forum to bring forward within 6 months for approval by the states the necessary draft legislation to give effect to the proposals.
Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. The issue of 0 hours contracts and the role that they do play or that they should play in our economy is one which has been a hot topic for several years now. And as time has gone by, we've learned more about their prevalence in our society. We've learned more about the struggles that many people with these contracts face. And we've seen countless examples of where they're clearly being used inappropriately. We know that many of these people struggle to make ends meet. They find it impossible to plan ahead when their income varies so much from week to week. And we've heard stories of people who are already on the bus down to work when they get that text message from the boss telling them that there's actually no work for them that day. And I myself have met people who've worked in finance firms doing an ordinary working week, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, but are on a 0 hours contract to get out of having to fulfill the statutory requirements that come with having a full-time contract. I've met people who work 12-hour days in the care industry, but only get paid for a fraction of that time because the employer claims that travel time doesn't count as working, so they won't pay them for it, which at the end means that they're actually technically being paid less than the minimum wage. And I've also met people who've taken on 0 hours contracts on the promise that they'll get more hours when they take that job up, only to then be sanctioned by income support for taking on work which is considered more volatile. But I also have to say that I've met people on 0 hours contracts who are perfectly happy with them, who felt that they suited their particular employment needs and was mutually beneficial with their employer too. And many of us in this assembly have expressed views at election time about this issue, and many of us have said that we were concerned about the inappropriate use of 0 hours contracts, which we wish to see something done about. And so far in this electoral term, the current government has done nothing whatsoever to address this issue. In fact, under this government, the proportion of workers on 0 hours contracts has gone up. Half of the new jobs created in the past 6 months have been 0 hours contracts. And whilst in the UK only 2% of jobs are 0 hours, in Jersey it's 12% and rising. The government boasts that Jersey has record levels of employment, yet it whitewashes the fact that we also have a record population because of their complete failure to enforce any controls at all, and that the jobs being created are not of a quality that any of us should be prepared to settle for as acceptable. Now, I said to my electorate that I supported a crackdown on the abusive use of 0 hours contracts, including specifically the abolition of exclusivity clauses. So when the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel announced that it was going to do a review on this subject, I thought that that would be a helpful and positive step towards encouraging the government to take the necessary action it needs to protect workers who are currently not getting a fair deal. And I thought that that would be the most effective vehicle for achieving change. And their report makes for interesting reading, and it makes many positive suggestions about what can be done to improve the situation for these workers. But what we've had from the Minister in response to these recommendations was a statement which I believe could be summed up in 3 words. Can't be bothered. They're focusing on other work, it's not a priority, it's a bit complex, and, well, we're just not that fussed. I don't think that's good enough. And so I've lodged this proposition on what should be the easiest aspect of this issue, in the hope that the Assembly can give directions to the Minister that actually it is a subject which we believe should feature higher up on their list of priorities, and it is something that we want to see action on. And I've picked this single recommendation from the scrutiny report about abolishing exclusivity clauses because it should be non-controversial. And I hope that by targeting the low-hanging fruit, we can start making progress and eventually then move on to the more complex areas and step by step start making a difference. Now, there's virtually unanimity across the board that these clauses are wrong and unjustifiable. We have the local branch secretary of Unite the Union and the president of the Chamber of Commerce singing from the same hymn sheet on this subject. And in fact, the comments which have been made by the Social Security Minister herself in the scrutiny hearing on this subject are the same as my own personal views. Yet the Minister has chosen not to proceed with acting on what the scrutiny panel has recommended and instead wants to kick it into the long grass. She said that there's no evidence that these clauses actually exist in Jersey and are being used, and she's lodged an amendment to this proposition which makes the case for that. And the problem is, it's just not true. Her amendment references the comments of the scrutiny panel's report, which admittedly does not provide a direct quote of concrete evidence about the use of exclusivity clauses here. But what there has been no reference to was the results of the 2014 annual social survey, which included questions on zero-hours contracts at the behest of the government, which reported that 1/5 of the people on these contracts claims that exclusivity was a problem. 1/5. Now, if that's statistically accurate, that's as many as 800 workers who are affected. I call that a problem. And that problem is exacerbated by the fact that these people are actually going to be, of all workers, the most unlikely to kick up a fuss about it because they'll be worried about being punished by their employers for complaining about their terms and conditions, not get the hours, not be able to pay the bills, and potentially even ending up getting sanctioned from income support for the way they would have behaved. Now, I'm sure members will have their own views on the role that zero-hours contracts should or shouldn't play in our society and our economy, but there has been virtually unanimity across the board that exclusivity clauses are wrong. So I'm making the case against specifically those clauses, and I know that there's an amendment to come from the Social Security Minister, which I have comments to make on, but I'll wait until we are actually in that debate before making comments on that amendment. And I hope on this issue of principle that the Assembly can reflect what has seemed to be the view across the board in wider society, that these clauses are exploitative and wrong and that they should be banned. And I make the proposition, sir.
Proposition seconded. There is an amendment brought by the Minister for Social Security, and ask the greffier to read the amendment.
1, page 2, paragraph A, after the word prohibited, insert the words subject to sufficient evidence that exclusivity clauses are being misused and zero-hour contracts in Jersey. 2, page 2, paragraph B, for the words in consultation with the Employment Forum, substitute the words to direct the Employment Forum to consult and the Minister. Delete the words within 6 months, and after the words proposals, insert the words when the Employment Forum has the capacity, sufficient evidence has been presented and law drafting time is available.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. This is a complex issue, and I'm disappointed I was not given the opportunity to discuss it with Deputy Mezek before he lodged the proposition. We could have perhaps reached a more positive solution. I've thought long and hard about how to deal with the proposition, and I hope that Deputy Mezek will accept my amendment. As I said to the Deputy yesterday, I agree with the principle of the proposition, but unfortunately, it's not possible for me to accept it as currently worded. That is why I have lodged the amendment which will allow the Employment Forum to continue to review family-friendly rights as a priority over the next year. This is a long-standing commitment that I have carried forward from the previous Social Security Minister, and I have always said that the current basic level of family-friendly rights should be extended. Should my amendment be rejected, that important work will be delayed until 2018. The Employment Forum simply does not have the capacity to consult on both issues in 2017, as well as undertaking the minimum wage review. The members of the Forum give a great deal of their own time to perform this important honorary role, and their workload is already at full capacity for 2017. If a problem with exclusivity clauses had been demonstrated, either in Deputy Mesick's proposition or in the scrutiny panel's review, I would have been more happy to consider making this a priority instead. The evidence that I have received from a range of organisations detailed at the back of our amendment and industry representatives shows that local employees will not benefit from a ban on exclusivity clauses. The Jersey Chamber of Commerce does not see exclusivity clauses being used by employers. They already advise their members not to use exclusivity clauses, and they consider that legislation is not required. The Jersey Advisory and Conciliation Service said no issues have arisen with the use of exclusivity 0 hours contracts, and that, to quote, legislating against such clauses is unlikely to have any significant impact. JACS provides employers with a template for 0 hours contracts. They have decided to specify in the template that 0 hour employees are permitted to work for other employers, and I quote from their document. This document sets out the terms and conditions that apply when you have accepted work from us. However, nothing in these terms prevents you from accepting work from another employer. This amended template will ensure that there is clarity in the terms of employment and is now available on the JACS website. I think many people would agree in principle that if an employer offered no hours of work but stopped a person working elsewhere, that would be unfair. However, agreeing with this sentiment does not mean that we must change the law immediately. My amendment, first of all, ensures that we would follow an appropriate procedure. I would direct the Forum to consult, they would consult the public, and then make a recommendation. If they recommend a law change, I would request law drafting and then state's approval. My amendment also accounts for the potential complexity of the law drafting. It is not as straightforward as it sounds. First of all, we would need to create the statutory concepts of a 0 hour contract and an exclusivity clause within the law, and then we would need to provide for anti-avoidance and enforcement measurements. It might appear that there is no harm in making this change, even without any evidence. Our law is currently simple and appropriate for Jersey. More red tape brings a cost to employers, particularly small businesses. 80% of our businesses in Jersey are classified as small businesses, as 5 employees or under. If employers wish to avoid complexity in the law, some might make other arrangements, such as fake self-employment with no employment rights at all. The UK has recently seen a rise in these types of insecure arrangements, such as gig work. Uber is an example of this. Although this debate is about the narrow issue of exclusivity, and it is not about 0 hours contracts generally, I would like to emphasise that, unlike the UK, our employment law already gives 0 hour employees the full range of employment rights. These include holiday pay, redundancy pay, minimum wage, family-friendly rights, and protection against unfair dismissal. I amended the employment law in 2015 to ensure that this was the case. My amendment today would ensure that we do not prioritise new legislation on the off chance that exclusivity might be a problem in Jersey, and that we enable the promised review of family-friendly rights to continue as planned in 2017. During that time, we will actively keep zero-hour contracts under review through the labour market data. The Statistics Unit has agreed to include more information on zero-hour jobs within the Manpower Report. I have also committed to regularly publish more detailed information on zero-hour contracts obtained by looking at the manpower and contributions data together. If my amendment is adopted, I will look at zero-hour contracts as the next priority after the family-friendly review is complete. We know that Jersey is behind the rest of the world, other than Guernsey, on maternity rights, and it is my first priority to rectify that. So I propose the amendment.
Amendment seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Messick.
Thank you, sir. I thought I should speak early on in this debate just to lay out my position with relation to it, and suffice to say I won't be supporting the amendment, and I hope members reject it. And the very simple reason why I don't want members to accept this amendment is because it essentially, in its wording, gives a wonderful get-out clause to do nothing. It uses language, it talks about sufficient evidence that exclusivity clauses are being misused. Well, what does that mean? That's entirely subjective, and who is it down to? It's not down to the Assembly, it'll be down to a minister, and if this amended proposition is accepted, it would make it very difficult to then bring a subsequent proposition to this Assembly to encourage her, or to instruct her rather, to go ahead and do something when we think that sufficient evidence is there, but which the minister disagrees and says there isn't sufficient evidence. So that, I think, is my primary reason for opposing this amendment, is that it actually does nothing but enshrine the status quo. Right now, the position of the Minister for Social Security is that she can go ahead and do something to crack down on the exploitative use of zero-hours contracts, or she can choose not to. If the amended proposition is passed, that situation remains exactly the same, and there is no compulsion on her or her department whatsoever to do anything. Now, I think that it is a much better way forward to stand up and say, no, we are casting a very clear verdict. We want action to be taken on this specific point, and we'd like it to be done relatively soon. And the Minister has said that there's a priority to deal with all sorts of other things. But of course, the problem is, just because you say something is second on your list, doesn't mean that when you finish the thing that's first on your list, you then move on to the second thing, because times change, new issues come up, things can overtake it. This actually, amended proposition, allows us to be in a situation where this could theoretically never be dealt with, just because, oh, something else comes along, oh, another thing comes along, and it doesn't get dealt with. So this amended proposition would do nothing but enshrine the status quo as things are, and I don't believe that we'd see any meaningful action early next year to see tangible improvements to the working conditions of these people on zero-hours contracts. And it does bug me when we talk about getting this sufficient evidence when we've had the Jersey Annual Social Survey of 2014, which asked questions on zero-hours contracts because the Council of Ministers asked it to, and it came forward and said that a fifth of the people who responded on zero-hours contracts said exclusivity was a problem for them. And I just sort of wonder, what more are we going to get, or what is going to be considered sufficient if a fifth of people on these contracts saying it's a problem isn't sufficient enough to say it's a problem. The Minister referred to red tape for businesses, and of course I sympathise with that argument. I want to have an economy which is dynamic, which is efficient, and where opportunities are being created for both businesses and employees so that they can all get on in life, and if there's anything government can do appropriately to regulate it, to regulate the economy to help them, or to step back when it's necessary, or to make interacting with the government more slick and efficient to help them, then of course I support that, and I'm happy to see red tape cast aside when that red tape is inhibiting businesses' opportunities to grow. But I think the problem here, and the stats that I've seen, certainly in relation to how zero-hours contracts are used in the UK, is that the businesses which exploit them don't actually tend to be the small and medium enterprises. They tend to be the much bigger businesses where there isn't that face-to-face relationship between the boss and the worker. Smaller businesses, actually, the relationships often tend to be better because there's a closer working relationship. There's better communication streams for the employee to the employer when they're having a problem for it to be considered. And those smaller businesses often have to offer decent terms and conditions and pay to their employees so that they can get good employees to come to them, so that they don't end up just going to the larger corporations which are able to act in a very different way and often act in a very uncompetitive way to those small businesses. So I don't accept this red tape argument as being one which holds much sway here, because frankly it's an argument always to do nothing, or we can't possibly regulate exploitation because that will impinge on businesses' ability to grow. Well, no, I don't agree with that. We should have appropriate regulation where necessary to make sure that workers do get a fair deal and to make sure that businesses have the infrastructure in place that they need to succeed, and not simply say, well, we're never ever going to look out for working people who've got a rough deal. I think that shows actually being on the wrong side here. So I don't agree with that point. And on the basis that this amendment is a green light to do nothing, I hope members will reject it, and instead we can have a debate purely on my unamended proposition to decide yes or no, do we do something about this, or do we say we're not prepared to crack down on the more exploitative elements of zero-hours contracts, a topic which many members of the public are seriously concerned about, a topic which is affecting the quality of life of many people in our community, and I hope we can have that debate as it is. And if there is a genuine problem with the 6 months deadline that I've put in that amendment, there's nothing to stop the minister doing what ministers frequently do, which is that they do take up a piece of work with a time frame, and when something happens, something unforeseen crops up and they realise that actually they're not able to meet that deadline, we'll come back to the States and we'll talk about it. And if there's good reasons for that, we're all very understanding and accommodating people. We'll be prepared to listen to that. And if the minister wants to say, well, sorry, 6 months isn't good enough, 8 months would be better, well, I'd be prepared to listen to that as long as there's a good case for it. So I think that's actually the more sensible way to go about it, and I think that that is what will end up producing tangible difference to these people. So I hope members will reject the amendment.
Deputy Labby.
May I first reassure you, sir, that when I attended the recent CPA conference in Canada earlier this year, I'd like to think that I blazed a trail for Jersey and was a very good ambassador, even to the extent that when we touched on the subject of the mechanism for speaker, I kept my personal concerns to myself, and to use the modern vernacular, it was my pleasure to big you up. And as far, sir, as you personally or your deputy occupying that chair, I want you to know that you have my complete confidence and the privilege is all ours. On to 0 hours, and my view is that it is simply an unfair opportunity to undermine employee conditions that has no justification. It primarily allows exploitative or lazy employers to get away with abusing their workforce with little evidence to suggest extra jobs are created. And if the minister has evidence to the contrary, I'd like to hear it. Otherwise, it's just another legal loophole to con the workers. Thank you.
Deputy St. Warren.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I believe the Minister's amendment is an unacceptable amendment. It takes what is a straightforward proposition, and in Part A of the amendment it introduces a caveat that the prohibition of exclusivity clauses should be subject to sufficient evidence, without saying to us what would be deemed sufficient evidence. And who decides that the evidence is sufficient? Simply prohibit them, yes, but subject to sufficient evidence. What on earth does that mean? And in Part B of the amendment, it seeks to amend the proposition to say that the minister should bring legislation to the states when sufficient evidence has been presented. I find that so disappointing. It means that the minister alone wants to decide when sufficient evidence has been presented. And if the minister feels the evidence is insufficient, then presumably the matter can never be returned to this House. And I regret to say that we on the scrutiny panel know where the minister is coming from here, because in response to our scrutiny report, the minister did not believe that zero-hours contracts or exclusivity clauses were causing any sort of problem in the island. And the minister declined to take any action at all over zero-hour contracts or exclusivity clauses, save for the amendment of guidance that is available through JACS to employers. And I'm sure all reasonable employers and good employers in this island observe industry guidance and good industry practice. It's not those employers that we are criticising here. It is those unscrupulous employers who would seek to place people on a contract with no guarantee of work and then limit their ability to seek other income. Zero hours working is a huge issue for this island, and it is this assembly that needs to weigh up evidence upon it and decide on this question. I submit it is not for the minister to have the power, as sought by this amendment, to decide whether or not sufficient evidence is presented to her. As a servant of this assembly, it disappoints me that a minister should propose an amendment which takes away that ability to decide whether the evidence warrants any legislation, and instead wants to be an arbiter of it all. It is my submission that we do have evidence that is sufficient already to bring before us. This assembly has already discussed contracts which contain an exclusivity clause. Wasn't it a year ago or more that we were concerned about workers who were being employed to lay fibre optic network in this island? Those workers were engaged on a prestigious contract which was let by a publicly owned body, of which we, the States of Jersey, are shareholders. It was a contract to deliver public good, to make the island leaders in our digital future. Those workers digging up the roads, putting those cables in, were engaged on zero-hour contracts, and moreover, there were exclusivity clauses in those contracts. I have one of those contracts here. I read short extracts. Please note, this is a 0 hours agreement. Sorry, a 0 hours engagement. Work may be offered from time to time, depending on the needs of the business, but there is no guarantee of work. You are under no obligation to accept the work offered. And then, in the depth of the small print, while working for the company and/or its client, you must devote your whole time and attention to the activities within your role profile, your job description, in other words, or as otherwise instructed by the company and/or its client, unless prevented from so doing by sickness or injury. That is an exclusivity clause, a requirement...
Sir, I wonder if the... well, actually, a point of clarification is not a point of order, so I'll ask whether the Deputy is prepared to give way.
I'll give way, sir, yes.
Sorry, I'm confusing myself. It's not the Deputy I wish to give way. I wish for the Solicitor General to consider whether the statement which the Deputy has just made, that the clause he's read out, is actually an exclusivity clause. It is simply a clause that says, whilst working for the company, i.e. employed on the job, they must give their full and complete attention to the work, not that they can't work for somebody else at the same time.
Well, thank you. The Deputy Warren, please continue. The Solicitor General will no doubt think about that question which is coming his way.
I think the following clause in the contract may clarify that issue, because the following clause says, you may undertake other work during the course of the engagement as long as you agree suitable arrangements with your engagement manager in writing in advance. In the event that your other work proves to be detrimental to your work with the company, it may be necessary to review matters. So yes, this is a requirement that whilst engaged on this contract, the employee must devote his whole time and attention to the job. And If the employee felt he was short of hours, he hadn't been given enough work by this company, by any company, then if they want to go out and seek other work, they've got to ask permission. They've got to approach in advance and seek an approval from their employer. And that can only be agreed in writing, in advance. So this is a control. This is a controlling employer seeking to abuse their dominant position. So we have that example of what has gone on in the island in the past, because that employer, I understand, is no longer working in the island. But there are also other pieces of survey evidence, some gathered by the Minister herself and reported in the Jersey Annual Social Survey of 2014, which Deputy Mezek has alluded to. Those questions in that survey were asked at the request of the Minister, and the question was, is being allowed to work for another employer whilst on a zero-hour contract a problem, not a problem, a slight problem, or a significant problem? It wasn't a problem for most people, because yes, for a lot of people, zero-hour contracts do work well. But 17% said it caused slight problems, 2% said it caused them significant problems. Therefore, not being allowed to work for another employer whilst on a zero-hours contract is affecting 19%, or 1 in 5 of people working on those contracts. 1 in 5. It's disappointing when the Minister has set out in her amendment the views of other bodies. She's not also included those statistics which she had sought and which she holds within her department. It is not mentioned in her amendment. We now know that there are over 4,000 people working on zero-hours contracts as their main source of income. I don't include the greater number who may have be using it to supplement their income, but it is, for me, those 4,000 or more is the main worry. We had discussion yesterday in question time about the precise figure, and I'm glad that the Minister, as a result perhaps of my questioning, has arranged with the Statistics Unit that we can get more information about those people. And the Minister's Department herself will, we are told, be providing those figures. But even if we take the figure of 4,000 in June 2014, even though we know it's greater now because the numbers on zero-hours contracts have gone up, and the Statistics Unit calculated at 4,700, but if the Minister doesn't accept 4,700, let's take 4,000, which is the figure given in the annual survey of persons using in full-time employment on a zero-hours contract. That's about 1 in 12, I believe, of the economically active population. So that's 1,000 people who have some sort of difficulty with not being able to work with for another employer. Now, the question in the JAS survey was worded whether you have a significant problem or a slight problem, and the Minister may wish to discount those who said it was only a slight problem. But that still leaves 2% who said that for them it was significant. 2% of 4,000 is 80. Is the Minister saying that we should not legislate for 80 people who feel that not being able to work for another employer is a significant problem for them? Is 80 too small to have regard to? But let's wait a minute. Is it limited to those 80 people? The survey was taken at one point in time in 2014. 80 said it was causing them a significant problem. Why would they say that? Most likely because at that time they were saying their employer was not giving them enough hours to provide them with an adequate income. It was causing them that problem. But ask the same question 3 months later, the situation may have changed. By that time, their employer may have got more work, maybe giving them more hours. So it's no longer causing those 80, perhaps, or some of them, a significant problem. But there may be other employees by that time who've had their number of hours cut down. And those employees begin to feel they've got a significant problem. So at different times, different people will find it a significant problem, meaning it will affect quite a large number of people over a period of time. We have a second piece of survey evidence, and that is the scrutiny panel survey. We conducted a survey monkey survey of employers and employees. And the Minister in her report correctly states that none of the employer respondents to our survey reported using exclusivity clauses. And that doesn't surprise me. I would expect that anyone wishing to engage in that sort of survey would not admit to that, but would also be responsible employers. But the Minister does not refer in her report to the part of the survey that the employees filled in. And that does throw up some evidence. Again, I don't know why the Minister was selective in referring to only one part of the survey when she had dealt with the evidence from the scrutiny panel in her response to our report. And it should be remarked that the employees who responded to our survey were not the employees of the employers who responded. And around 150 of employee respondents had 0 hours contracts as their main job, and 16% of those reported that they were never allowed to work for another employer. Not a huge statistical number, but it is still some evidence. We also asked and got information from people who no longer were on a 0 hours contract but had previously worked on a 0 hours contract. And about 16% of those said that at that time they were in a contract that, and it was a concern to them that they were never allowed to work for another employer. So we have, as evidence, 2 surveys, each producing evidence that employees do feel restricted by not being able to work for others on 0 hour contracts. And we have the very fact that 0 hour contracts numbers are wholly out of proportion in Jersey to numbers in the UK. 12% of all jobs here, as against perhaps 2 to 3% in the UK. The UK felt it necessary to introduce legislation to curtail misuse there, and why should we not think there is the potential for misuse occurring in Jersey? I wish it were the case that we could say all employers were paragons of virtue and would never impose exclusivity clauses. The Minister seems to suggest that also, just because we don't hear of it. But I regret I don't share that optimism, because employers here appear to be using 0 hour contracts very indiscriminately. It seems to me for too many, it's become an automatic business model. You take on new staff, you put them on a 0 hours contract, the employer has more control, the employees are likely to be more compliant because of their vulnerability, keeps them in a state of insecurity, and you rarely address the true nature of the work they do, which might be regular hours or it may turn into regular hours. There is no mechanism for addressing and converting the contract into something it should be, which is to provide employees with a certainty of employment and income. So do we need more at this stage when we know that there is that potential for misuse? Is it necessary to seek further evidence? What further evidence could we obtain? Because a consultation process will receive responses from the Chamber of Commerce and the Institute of Directors and the like, and we know what their practices are. They adopt good practice and they urge their members to adopt good practice. But what evidence could we draw and obtain from businesses who don't belong to the Chamber or to the Institute of Directors and who are unlikely to come forward as businesses and give evidence of the use of these clauses? Well, what evidence would we get from 0 hour contract workers who are likely to be low-paid workers, the majority of them young, and struggling to earn an income. I'm afraid they didn't engage much with the scrutiny panel. We had no individual, or perhaps very few individual submissions. They don't engage with us generally as politicians or this assembly, do they? Will they engage with civil servants conducting a consultation? We know how difficult it is to reach those people, but we also know how vulnerable they are and how open they are to exploitation. We know that possibility arises. They are entirely dependent on their employers giving them work. They may not like the work they've got or the contract they've got, but they are not going to complain because they risk their livelihoods. These people will not put their head over the parapet. Even if they are promised anonymity, it doesn't really work. They fear it will get back to their employer. So they put their head down and they get on with their job, because the bosses hold all the cards and the employees have little options. It occurs to me that this type of working could be seen as a form of bullying. We protect people from bullying in schools, we protect people from bullying online, but it is a source of regret to me that this Council of Ministers appears to have no interest in protecting employees from this sort of bullying in the area of employment. So I would say we do have evidence of misuse, and it is right as a matter of principle that this Assembly should prevent employers taking advantage of a situation, particularly with the prevalence of zero-hour contracts in our island. And it seems to me our employment law should provide this protection. And to agree this amendment brought forward by the Minister and to ask her to make the decision over whether evidence exists is a completely improper way of proceeding. It removes a decision that can properly be made by this Assembly, and I would urge that we reject the amendment. Thank members.
I call on Deputy Kevin Lewis.
Thank you, sir. In a previous life, as we say, sir, I was in the cinema business and for many, many years. And we always used to get a whoosh every year from tourism. Tourism was very good in the old days. And we used to take on students who were returning for the school holidays, or from the university break of about 6 weeks. They were glad of the work and we were glad to have them. But every single one of them had a contract of employment and were paid a very fair salary. Being a bit old-fashioned, I've always believed in fair days work for fair days pay. 0 hours contracts, I've never really been in favour with, even though we all want Jersey business to thrive. But 0 hours contracts with the exclusivity clause, I see as nothing more than economic slavery. This is something I will be supporting. I will support the proposition, but I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Senator Balash.
So there was much in the speech of the Deputy of St. Juan with which I think one could agree, and I think he is quite wrong to suggest that the government has no interest in or concern for the interests of employees. And indeed, this is a very good example, I think, of an instance where both the Minister and the proposer of the motion actually want to arrive at the same destination. No one believes that exclusivity clauses in a contract of employment are fair or acceptable. But I would liken the deputy to an impatient bullock standing at one end of a park with the minister, wanting to get to the exit at the other end. And what the minister is proposing to do is to take the ordered path through the park, while the deputy wishes to charge straight for the exit, crushing the rose beds, obliterating the camellias and knocking over the children's climbing frame as he goes. creating a 0 hours creating a 0 hours provision in a legislation is not easy, nor is it easy in the context of the Jersey employment law, I believe, to create a provision rendering illegal exclusivity clauses. Of course it's not impossible. Of course it has been done elsewhere, and of course it could be done here. But we need to be clear what we are talking about in terms of exclusivity clauses. The illustration given by the Deputy of St. Juan seemed to me arguably not to be an exclusivity clause. I understand an exclusivity clause to be in terms, you shall not work for any other employer while you are employed in this 0 hours contract. And that was not the example that the Deputy gave. It was a perfect example, it seemed to me, of why one should take time and take the orderly route through the park to arrive at the destination at which we all seek to arrive. We have an employment forum, which is composed of very sensible employer and employee representatives and others as well. And I think that all members can have trust in that forum. The Minister told us that the forum is considering a whole range of family-friendly rights at the moment. So which is more important? Is it more important that the forum should concentrate on exclusivity clauses, or should the employment forum concentrate on the broader range of family-friendly measures that it is considering at the moment? It seems to me, sir, that this Assembly ought to be able to rely upon the employment forum to take a sensible route through these issues. If the employment forum is satisfied that there is evidence that exclusivity clauses are a problem for employees, then personally I have no doubt at all that the employment forum will draw that to the attention of the Minister, and the Minister, when that is drawn to her attention, will instruct the Law Draftsman to prepare the appropriate legislation. And that is the broad purpose of the amendment which has been brought by the Minister. It seems to me that given that we all want to arrive at the same conclusion, the question is only whether we rush forward in an unseemly way, careless of the other things that the Employment Forum is considering at the moment, or whether we take the orderly route to arrive at where we want to get.
Any other members to speak? Deputy Green.
Thank you very much, sir. Essentially, this amendment is asking a very simple question. Do you agree with exclusivity clauses or not? I.e., do you really need sufficient evidence to say, no, I don't agree with exclusivity clauses? Because fundamentally there is a principle at stake here. You either support the use of them in whichever form they may appear, or you do not. Why do you need sufficient evidence to make that choice? And I cannot see any argument for saying I'll only vote against the use of exclusivity clauses if I've got sufficient evidence that they're being misused. I'm quite happy for them to be in a contract. Well, I'm not. I disagree with exclusivity clauses completely, irrespective of whether or not there is sufficient evidence that they are being misused. And the other issue I have with this amendment, sir, is that if this Assembly agrees to this amendment,
we are effectively removing the decision-making process from this assembly and handing it fair and squarely to the minister, because it is up to the minister to decide whether or not there is sufficient evidence. Not us. We are handing over responsibility to the minister and going, you decide, we don't want to know any more about this. And that I am not happy with, because to me, allowing the minister the authority to decide what is an exceptionally important principle is handing over our responsibility. And perhaps if this assembly does agree to support this amendment, then we are actually saying the minister knows best. Now that to me is possibly moving down a very, very dangerous path, because we are saying, because we accept the principle of ministerial government we have at the moment, we will not question the actions of any minister, and we will hand over our responsibility quite happily to the minister. This is not about sufficient evidence. This is an attempt to delay the principle which we are going to be debating in the proposition, which is, do I agree with exclusivity clauses? And therefore, I think in order for us to have a sensible and open debate on the proposition as lodged by Deputy Mezek, we have to not support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Solicitor General, you are asked by the Chief Minister, I think, as to whether the contract which the Deputy of St One read out in its entirety contained what in effect amounted to an exclusivity clause.
So I heard the Deputy, obviously I've not seen this contract, and when a court is considering contracts of employment, clearly it looks at the contract as a whole. I've only heard excerpts from it as read out by the Deputy. So at risk of giving a lawyer's answer, I think it depends on the definition of exclusivity. Because on the one hand, as Senator Balash said in his speech, having heard those excerpts from the contract which the Deputy read out, it could be argued that there is provision within that contract to agree with an employer that the employee can work for another employer. So therefore it is not an exclusivity provision. On the other hand, when I look at the English legislation which has amended the English statute prohibiting exclusivity contracts in 0 hours contracts, then the excerpts that I heard the Deputy read out would be caught by the English legislation, which is obviously not in force here. But the English legislation has gone to the time and trouble of defining what an exclusivity contract is. And reading the English legislation, it provides that any provision of a 0 hours contract which prohibits the worker from doing work or performing services under another contract or under any other arrangement, or, and then this is the important part, prohibits the worker from doing so without the employer's consent, is unenforceable against the worker. So it seems to me that that second qualification would probably catch that contract which I heard you read out, or the bits of it that I heard you read out. So to that extent, I repeat the point that it really does depend on the definition of exclusivity. And I think, well, I would suggest that if this assembly were minded to go down that route, it would need to go to the time and trouble of defining what exclusivity means, because otherwise there will be arguments as to what exclusivity means. And for that purpose, I would suggest there would need to be consultation with employers, employment bodies, and it will take time if the Assembly is minded to go down that route. It will need to be carefully thought out. So it's not, in my submission, it's not just a simple matter of banning exclusivity clauses. I think part of that process, you'd need to define what an exclusivity clause is. I hope that assists, sir.
Thank you, sir. Much of today's discussion on the exclusivity clause has veered into talking about zero-hour contracts in general, which is not actually what the proposition and this amendment is about in any way. It's part of it, but it's not about whether you like or dislike, or whether you're in favour of, or whether zero-hour contracts are a good thing or not. And yet many speakers have spent quite a bit of time talking about that. For the record, I'm not a great fan of zero-hour contracts, contrary to what social media would have me say. They do need looking at. The Minister for Social Security has already said it is on the agenda. It's not at the top, but it's on the agenda. Family-friendly time is being taken up at the moment, and rightly so. Listening just to the excellent legal advice we've just got there, this amendment is offering and asking for two things. One, it's asking for evidence. Evidence. A contract. Prevalence of contracts. Contracts that say exclusivity. Contracts that suggest exclusivity. And yet we've seen little of that at all. Little evidence at all. In fact, and rightly so, if you talked to the likes of the Chartered Institute of Personal Development, the CIPD, or if you talk to the likes of the Chamber of Commerce, their very good members, of course, would say, well, we've not seen any such contracts amongst our members at all. But then you go to the Jersey Hospitality Association. To the best of our knowledge, exclusive zero-hour contracts are not being used by our members in the hospitality industry. You go to the Jersey Farmers Union. Not only do they say they are not acceptable, which I agree with, they're not. They also say, furthermore, we do not find it anywhere. We are not aware of their use. So, okay, so let's go to somebody that would certainly have seen the problem of exclusivity if it was there. The Jersey Advisory and Conciliation Service, JACS. Now, surely they will have had tribunals. Surely they will have had people coming and saying, look what's in my contract, this is unfair. They say, therefore, whilst it may have previously been an issue in the UK, which has now been redressed by legislation changes, from the apparent lack of or number of such issues in Jersey, we would see it being effectively legislating against such a clause is unlikely to have any significant impact. Now, I don't